everyone, this is Richard Carlton for LearningFileMaker.com. We have a really excellent video for you today. It's pretty deep and pretty detailed, so I want to give you a little bit of an upfront summary of what to expect in this video. So first off, this video is for intermediate to advanced FileMaker developers. And this video is really about FileMaker Server 14, and a good chunk of it will be talking about WebDirect. So during this video, we're going to be interviewing and talking with, at length, Nick Lightbody, who is one of the resident experts in the FileMaker community about FileMaker Server. And he's done a great deal of testing on the FileMaker Server 13 and 14 platforms. And so he has a lot of information to give us. So during this video, we're going to discuss some very specific things that you can do within the built-in charting that's part of the FileMaker Server to look for problems within the FileMaker Server. And normally within FileMaker Server, all sorts of graphs can be created, and a vast majority of people have no idea what to do with this. This video is going to get you on the way to understanding the 3 critical items in the charts that you need to look at. Another section of this video, we're going to be talking about how Nick Lightbody has established a standardized testing procedure to try to benchmark FileMaker Server configurations between different versions and different configurations of hardware. And while in this video we don't go really through his testing methodology, this is probably going to be your first exposure to that testing system that he's established. It's an automated testing suite that he's built. We'll work in future videos to get you more information about that testing suite. However, that testing suite is yielding some really amazing information about the differences between FileMaker Server 13 and Server 14. And to cut to the chase, Server 14 is much faster. And we'll get into how and why and all the details therein. Additionally, Nick has done a lot of analysis on the memory requirements and changes that are part of WebDirect. In fact, the hardware requirements for WebDirect 13 were extreme. That's come down dramatically. So in this video, we're going to explicitly talk about the memory requirements for WebDirect 14 and how those affect how you set the FileMaker Server cache as part of your setup for FileMaker Server. So this is a detailed technical video, and it's one of our longer ones, so buckle up, get a fresh Diet Coke, and prepare to have your brain filled up with awesome knowledge. So to get things rolling here, I want to introduce Nick. He's live with me on this video, all the way from the UK. Nick, start things off by just giving everyone a quick introduction as to who you are and what your background is.
I discovered FileMaker in 1997. I'm a lawyer, an attorney by trade, and I set up my own law firm in 1997, and I wanted to have voice recognition, so I went out and bought myself a Mac, because in those days Power Secretary was the only thing worth having for voice recognition on anything. I ended up being introduced to FileMaker through a friend. He said, look, this is what you need. And one thing led to another, and after a few years I retired from the law and became a full-time FileMaker developer. And that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years. And FileMaker, of course, has come on. It's developed enormously over that period. And what you can do with it now is just amazing if you're prepared to organise yourself a bit, and as you said, yes, I guess I'm an organised guy. I guess most lawyers have to be, and so yeah, I'm really excited by what we're able to do with FileMaker now because of all the great improvements that have appeared over the last few years, particularly things like WebDirect, like being able to run it straight off mobile devices from a FileMaker server. These are really accessible things that make using the platform so much better for normal people, I think.
That's great. So first off, I mean, most people are aware that WebDirect has been improved greatly in FileMaker 14, and of course it runs much faster, and WebDirect comes from Server 14, so the assumption is that somehow Server is faster, but it's faster in a lot of other ways that maybe most people aren't aware of. And so why don't you walk us through some of the testing you've been doing and we could talk about that. I mean, because people frequently say to us, we have this FileMaker server, and it's not working very hard. So we could always put more people on the server, because they look at the performance chart of the CPU or something, and they see it's not doing very much work. And so they're always thinking about how many more people they can put on the server, because the server's not loaded down very much. I mean, have you done testing along these lines?
Yes, Richard, that's a great place to start the conversation. The thing to understand is that FileMaker Server, as a software platform, has a great deal in common with other database management systems. They're software that are designed to look after your data really well and provide services to potentially a very large number of people, and do a lot of different, very small things at almost the same time. And depending on the resource available on your server, whether it's a small, humble little Mac Mini or a big, robust industrial piece of kit, whatever it is, it has a certain capacity, and within that capacity it'll run sweet as a nut, no problem at all. The thing to understand is the point at which it ceases to run sweet as a nut is the point at which things start to be slightly more that it can cope with, and in those circumstances small delays start occurring in that the server has to start queuing things up slightly. But the moment it starts doing that queuing of things, the delay that's being brought into the equation, will increase exponentially, or if not exponentially, extremely rapidly. So that when you look at the FileMaker Server statistics, you want to see most of them running right along the bottom of the graph. When some of them, we can talk about this in a minute, when some of them start coming off the bottom, it's either that the machine is slowing down at that point, or it's the precursor to it happening imminently. So if you see a little flutter of activity on the graphs at the bottom and say, hey, I could put on 10 times as many users, then that's a misnomer. You want to see it always running along the bottom, and think of it as a binary system. It's either running sweet or it's running bad. You put too much load on it, then it's not going to cope, and you need to either reduce the load or increase the resource.
So what you're saying is that in another way is that this thing is going to idle, what looks like idling along at a very mellow tempo, loafing as we say, and then suddenly it will go to what you call choking the server, and the time between loafing and choking is very minimal. It's just like just suddenly it's in a bad way, and there's almost no in between time. Is that kind of what we're just saying?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. For example, on the screen right now, Richard, can you see my screen over there in California?
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
Okay, cool. Now, here is an example of the sort of thing we're talking about. And we'll talk in a moment maybe about exactly what the different lines on the graph mean. But the top part of this section has got 3 graphs on it. It's got a dark blue, a pale blue, and a yellow. And the dark blue is something called remote calls per second. It's a measure of activity. It's the number of jobs that the server's being asked to do. The pale blue is showing how many calls in progress at any given time. The yellow is wait. Now, we're showing here a server that is highly stressed. And you can tell it's highly stressed if you look at the lower part of the screen where we're showing the operating system activity monitor. This is the CPU history. And with any computer, when you get the type of CPU history structure you're getting on the left-hand part of the screen, which is what we call plateauing, then that's pretty much on 100%. What it means is that in this case, this machine's got 2 processors. There's the 2 tracks there, the bottom and top ones are the 2 processors, or the 2 cores. When they get to the point where they're maxed out, where they're plateaued, at that point you're not going to see much meaningful performance from any software on the server. Everything is going to take ages. In this particular case, it was maxed out with 32 users. We then took 2 of our virtual users off the system, and you can see in the middle of the screen at the bottom, then the plateauing disappeared, except for one little iteration a bit later on, and it went back to a normal sort of level of activity. And the wait time on the graph at the top, the yellow line, you can see how after a couple more peaks it's then settled back down. And if you look at the right hand end of the top graph, you can see that the yellow, the wait, is almost along the bottom. The blue is within, mainly underneath the 50 iterations per second, and the pale blues. This type of level of activity, this type of thing here, if the server's running sweetly, and this here is relating to this here. This is what things running nicely look like. But the moment you do this, this is what you don't want to see at all.
Right. And so the point being that you went from 30 users to 32 users. And this was an actual test that you were running, correct? With your own software, a scripted test, correct?
Yeah.
And so we knew that what each of the clients was doing the identical activity. So I've actually looked at Nick's testing everyone, and he's got some testing software that actually very mechanical in nature, kind of like a robot, and it sits there and it kind of beats away on the FileMaker server in a pre-scripted sort of way. And so you can be rest assured that each of those 30 or 32 people are actually robot kind of processes, and they are doing the exact same thing. So those 2 that were dropped off, each of those users are identical in nature as to what their activities are. So it's important to also understand here, and I need to frame the conversation here. Really, really important. This is 30 or 32 users that are actively hammering the server, correct? And so it's processes that these people are, and it's scripted, so the script is running full speed continuously, finding, sorting, creating new records, all that kind of stuff. Is that right, Nick?
Correct. Let's just give a little bit more detail there. We've got 3 different types of test user. We call them intense, or busy, or relatively inactive. And we've done testing with all sorts of different combinations, but the tests we're showing you here, and the ones we find are most useful, are running what we call busy users. Busy users are like having people in the office who just do nothing but work and keep on putting in new records the whole time. So if you thought of something a little bit like a supermarket checkout maybe, or somewhere where they're just hammering away doing stuff, the intense user is like a robot hammering away without respite, and that pushes the machine very, very rapidly towards being overburdened. The busy users are at a more human level, but still really quite busy. So a normal type of combination of users would in fact be, in most offices, a proportion of busy users, maybe 10%, maybe a third, probably not much more than that, while many other users are relatively inactive because they're making new records sometimes, but a lot of the time they're just browsing information, looking at it, doing other things, because of course in most offices, although your FileMaker system is really important, you're not actually hammering on it the whole time. So it's very important to understand that the testing we're doing here and the user numbers we're using occasionally, they're not absolute user numbers at all. They're used as a basis for comparison between different machines. So we can say on a certain machine it'll support a load of X, another machine it'll support a load of 2X. So if your existing machine will maybe support 50 users, say, and you test it and it comes out with our testing as supporting 15, then if we run our testing on another machine that shows it'll support 30, that's times 2, so you can apply times 2 to your 50, so you're then on 100. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea is that we just have a standardized way of testing, but I just want to make sure that all the people watching this video understand that this is not reflective of this kind of computer running 30 users, and that maxes out, because these are effectively, once again, robot machines. And
Yeah.
you're never going to have, I mean, in reality, 30 busy people in a real office. More likely, this represents 75 or 80 users in a company at least, or maybe even 100 people.
Well, Richard, we'd all like to have people in our office hammering away really busy the whole time, wouldn't we? But equally, in every successful business, people have to have time to think, they have to talk to other people, they have to do all sorts of other stuff. But I think the thing that, going back to why we've done this, the thing that we felt was lacking was there was no existing methodology for actually working out what the capacity of a given hardware and software combination was with FileMaker Server, i.e. how many users can we realistically expect to run on this box. It runs smooth and nice. If perhaps we're looking at buying services from people running virtual servers in the cloud, what type of capacity might we expect from a certain configuration, a certain form of deployment? So this methodology is to have a simple way of running a test or series of tests that will give you a basis for comparison, so you can say this has got a capacity of X, this has got a capacity of 3X, this has got a capacity of X divided by 2, or whatever.
Sure. Well, show us what you discovered in terms of 13 to 14, because I know that was really interesting.
Okay.
Or is that the next step in our conversation?
I think what we can do here is let's take a quick look at the FileMaker server statistics that we can use, and then go on and look at 13 and 14, if that makes sense.
Now, yeah, absolutely. This is the chart that you created?
Yeah, that's right.
So tell us about this. So this is, this is like a cheat. Well, it's too bad FileMaker didn't come up with this. Leave it to a third-party consultant to come up with something like this, as awesome as this is. So these are the different lines of a chart that can come out of FileMaker Server, and it kind of tells you which ones are important for what reason. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, the small box on the right is a screenshot of what you'll get with FileMaker Server if you open the FileMaker Server Administration console. Then go down to the section on the left that deals with statistics. Open that up, and you get a blank screen where you can then click and select which tracks you want to run, and as it says on the right hand side there, select up to 6, so you can have up to 6 statistic types. What this doesn't do is it doesn't give you a lot of guidance on what you might want to use. So what we've done is to just cut those up and spread them around a bit, and try and show what we found has worked for us. And the most important ones for our testing have been the ones under section 1, which is, our question was, is the server's CPU handling the load gracefully, or is it moving towards a choke? And the 3 measures we're using here are the remote calls per second, and the remote calls in progress, and the wait time in microseconds. There is a 4th statistic in this area called Elapsed Time, which, as we've said in the note, we're not quite sure what it adds. Somebody somewhere will doubtless tell us, because everyone uses these things in different ways. But our realization was that, and we'll look at a graph in a second, that the remote calls per second is a really good measure of the physical load going into the server, because they're jobs. Each job coming in is a call. A call may in fact be several different bits, but essentially it's how FileMaker have chosen to measure these things. And if the thing is running sweetly, then you'll rarely see the remote calls in progress statistic come off the bottom of the graph. That isn't because there aren't any. It's because FileMaker Server is providing you with statistics based on a sampling interval. And in the FileMaker admin console, you can set the sampling interval, and you can reduce it down to a minimum of, I think from memory, 3 seconds. Mostly it's going to be set at 30 or 20 second intervals. And because the remote calls that it's measuring will take only milliseconds or microseconds perhaps to complete. Very often it doesn't see any at all. Not that they're not happening, it's just that it's not catching them within the sampling.
So they're happening so fast they don't even show up on the graph.
And the point then is, Richard, that when they start showing up on the graph, it shows that the thing is starting to slow down.
Yeah, so that's almost like a term we have here is a parakeet in the coal mine, right? If you're in a coal mine and you're digging in the coal mine and the parakeet, doesn't make it, you got poison gas in the coal mine.
Okay, well, in British mining we used to have canaries, but it's the self-same thing. The canary
in the coal mine, yeah. Parakeet, canary, yeah, exactly.
On the crib sheet there, we've got some other things as well, but let's just concentrate on the top part, I think, and maybe we can talk another time about some of the other things on here.
So Nick, go ahead and show us the comparison between 13 and 14. I'm dying to know what we found out.
Well, Richard, that comparison between 13 and 14 is quite a big difference that we've seen. And I have to say that when under beta testing we first observed this, I had some doubt about whether or not I was actually seeing what I was seeing, because I thought, hey, this is quite a big change here. And I still don't fully understand why, but we've had people in a lot of different places now running the same tests on FileMaker Server 13 and 14, and we're seeing a really consistent pattern here. So this has meant that running under OS 10, under Yosemite, this is 10.10, we're seeing FileMaker Server having an apparent capacity of more than 2 times and up to 4 times as many apparent users. We haven't observed exactly the same performance change under Windows yet, but that may well be a function of the way in which we're measuring it. The basic point is that running FileMaker Server on 2 boxes and comparing the numbers, as we can see on the screen here, shows some really big differences. On the left here, we've got FileMaker Server 13 running our numbers, trying some stuff, and you can see that this is a server which, from the numbers on the left, you can see it's a 4-core server, 16 gig of RAM, and this is currently set at an 8 gigabyte cache. And you can see that this particular box is maxing out at about 20 users. Now, as we said before, that's merely indicative. It's not an indication of what it'll really do, but it's merely this yardstick we're using. We talked about the statistics. We've got the 3 statistics we talked about a few minutes ago on the screen there. The dark blue line is the remote calls per second. The yellow line is the wait in microseconds. And the pale blue line that you can only see a little bit down the bottom here, this is the remote calls in progress. Okay, so you can see that this machine has gone along running reasonably sweetly, and then what's happened? You can see that the pale blue calls in progress has come off the bottom. It's come off the bottom a little bit, not a lot, but as soon as it's come off the bottom, the wait time has started peaking right up here. And then when we've reduced the load slightly, it's come back down again and it's run on again smoothly.
Now to be clear here, this is 20 of our robot simulation users, 20 Correct. Real users, and the tests between 13 on the left and 14 on the right, these are the same robot users. So this is the exact same test on the left and right, correct?
It's the same test on left and right, but the server on the left is considerably more powerful than the server on the right.
So you're saying the 14 server ran more users, but it was like, looking at it, it's like less RAM, half the number of cores.
Half the cores and half the RAM, which, whether you say that's half as powerful or a quarter of powerful, I'm not quite sure, but it's a lot less powerful. So with a much smaller box, we're getting a much sweeter performance with significantly more users.
So clearly there's been some optimization under the hood with FileMaker between the 13 and 14 release cycle, which is great news. Well, they needed it with WebDirect, certainly.
Yeah, that is the case. And I mean, under 13 WebDirect, that was the first time we'd seen it in a release, and it's obviously a really important new technology. And like every first release, it's going to have some great stuff, and it's going to get better rapidly as they pour more resource into developing it. But I think another point we should just bear in mind here, Richard, is this: that when FileMaker Server is running on a box, whether it's a Windows box or whether it's an OS X box, the different parts, the different processes that FileMaker Server is running, those are all competing for resource from the operating system, which is essentially is CPU cycles, is RAM, it's the stuff that the computer provides as a resource for the software to run. And the thing to remember is it is actually the operating system that controls how these different competing processes, what they get. FileMaker Server normally is running 6 or 7 processes, and these are separate things doing separate parts of the service that this runs. So if you look on the activity monitor, you'll see them as different services or processes running under Windows, under OS X. It's exactly the same. And each of those different processes or services are actually competing with each other under the overall control of the operating system. So what we're seeing here is a combination of FileMaker Server 13 and 14, or 13 in one case, 14 in the other, under the OS X operating system, and how OS X on the right-hand side with 14, with Yosemite 10.10, how that's actually allocating resources. What we haven't yet seen is exactly how this works under Windows, and obviously all serious big-scale FileMaker Server operations are going to be under Windows, and we're looking forward to identifying exactly how these things work under Windows as well. But we're really excited by the very significant improvements in performance we've seen here, and also under WebDirect, of course.
Well, and then also I think with 14, the requirements for WebDirect have changed quite a bit. I think most successful deployments can be single machine deployments, and I think FileMaker's changed the RAM requirements. In fact, I think you were part of that conversation with FileMaker. I mean, can you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't like to claim any credit for that, but in talking to the technical people at FileMaker about what they're expecting from WebDirect under this beta stuff, the impression that they gave me was they were expecting every WebDirect user to need about 32 meg of RAM. And at that time, the formal advice on the FileMaker website was saying 256 meg of RAM per WebDirect user. This is something that had been on their site for since the release of FileMaker 13. Well, our testing showed that around about 32 meg of RAM was a really good yardstick for WebDirect, and I can say that the guidance referring to 256 did disappear from the FileMaker website very soon after that conversation.
So, Nick, I know that you're so awesome that you probably have some hidden statistics to share with us, so why don't you go ahead and do that?
Okay, that's my pleasure. We talked to FileMaker about what they hoped would be the case with WebDirect, and the thing to remember there is that there's memory, different types of memory is being parceled out in different ways. So on your given server, you're going to have X amount of RAM. Let's say you've got 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, when you set up the FileMaker Server cache from the admin console, many people will give it as much cache as they can because they think that's a good thing, and that's often a really bad idea. FileMaker Server 13, generally speaking, does not run well with more than 2 gig of cache. I don't know why, but this appears to be the case from our observations and from what many of the great and good have told us. FileMaker Server 14 seems to make good use of more cache, but you certainly don't want to give it too much. And part of the reason why you don't want to give it too much is the more cache you give FileMaker Server, which is cache is where it's putting records that it's using, analyzing, doing stuff with in memory in order to manipulate them more quickly. So it's like a great big pasteboard or clipboard that it can use. But if you set up part of your machine, you grab that memory to be FileMaker Server cache, it can't be used to run the operating system, and it can't be used to run FileMaker Server the services either. So you need to be really very careful about what you do. And you then need to remember that WebDirect is actually using memory, not from FileMaker Server cache. WebDirect is using memory, RAM, from the part of the RAM that isn't in FileMaker Server cache, hasn't been grabbed for cache. So WebDirect is using memory, RAM, that is part of the part allocated to the operating system. So in your 16 gigabyte setup, if you've taken, say, 4 gig of RAM for FileMaker Server cache, that leaves you with 12. Allow, say, 2 gigabytes for the operating system, that leaves you 10. That then leaves you 10 for other things to run, including WebDirect clients, and our numbers suggest 32 meg of RAM is about the number you want for each WebDirect user. So that's actually 30 per gigabyte. An easy number is 3 users per 100. 3 users per 100 meg of RAM, or 30 users per gig.
How many users per gig? 30. Oh, 30 per gig.
30, yeah.
Okay, so 3 users per 100 megs, or 30 per gig. That's pretty good. I like that. It makes the math easy. So that's the memory that really needs to be kind of sitting loose out there over and above.
Exactly.
Of course, we really can't allocate it specifically. We just have to make sure that we have lots of extra memory on the machine so the machine can grab it and use it. So that memory is also used by the web publishing core, right? To run the web publishing core. It's also used by Java, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So on these numbers we've got here, we've got on the left-hand side, the first column is a clean start. So this is no WebDirect users, and this is looking at how much RAM the different FileMaker Server processes are using. So FM Server D is the basic database server. That's what makes it all happen. Basically, deals with the data. Then the second one, FMS CWP, is custom web publishing. That service, custom web publishing, is used for the custom web publishing that people have been doing with FileMaker for many years, but is also used in part by WebDirect. But beyond that, WebDirect is also using a number of Java processes to provide the illusion of looking at FileMaker through your browser. And so you've got to add together the memory and the resources, if you like, used by these 3 different areas: FileMaker Server itself, custom web publishing, and Java. So on the left here we can see that with Server running, it's got some Java processes running, but they're, if you like, in limbo. They're running and available to provide support to WebDirect users, but there's no load on them, so we call that a clean start. We then go on to 1 WebDirect user, 2, 3, 5, 10, and 15. And if you take those numbers and you say that the clean start memory used, which we've called the core, in this case it's 3 gig, or 3009 meg in total. We've then taken that off the total for the amount of memory used for each of the different numbers of users, and that's given us an amount of resource of RAM being used. So taking, for example, 5 users, we've got 3,132 meg in total being used. Take off the 3,009, that gives us 124 that have come into use because of having 5 WebDirect users, and that then, of course, gives you 25 meg per WebDirect client. So it varies a bit, and we don't have the inside knowledge to know exactly how it's engineered. We don't really care. What we do know is that if you, as a rule of thumb, if you say 32 meg per WebDirect user with FileMaker 14, then you're in the right ballpark. And that is a really, really big change, a big improvement from what FileMaker were recommending with 13. So this means that providing you've got your licensing in place, you can have a significant number of WebDirect users running on FileMaker Server 14 without having to go to a extremely high hardware configuration. What it also means is whatever kit you've got at the moment under 13, if you deploy it with 14, you can get an awful lot more bang out of your buck by merely upgrading from 13 to FileMaker Server 14.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what's the total FileMaker footprint? I mean, right here it's 309, but what's down here? It's
the total here. This is the total line here. So with 15 users, the FileMaker footprint is 3207. So it's got about 200 meg more in use with 15 users than it had on a clean start. So clean start was 3009 and 3207. Call it 200 with 15.
That's pretty lightweight. So yeah, so that is the complete FileMaker footprint right there. Well, Nick, this is fantastic information. So we've covered some of the charts and how they can be used to look at performance issues within the FileMaker server product line. We've looked at the differences between 13 and 14 in terms of some of the performance improvements you're going to see in the product, not just in WebDirect, but in the product itself. And then we've also talked about some of the memory requirements that have changed in WebDirect. That's part of this equation as well. And we can go a lot farther with WebDirect with the same amount of hardware, right? So that's a lot to absorb in one video. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. I mean, it's early days, and doubtless when we see wide-scale deployment, we'll learn a lot more. And I've got no doubt that if the nature of the solutions that are being deployed are perhaps a little bit less efficient than one might hope, then of course you may well find that the amount of users, the number of users and what they're doing that can be supported will reduce. Because the thing to remember, I think, is this, Richard, and I think it's a fair point, that everyone who owns a FileMaker server deployment, everyone who's in control of it, if it doesn't run well, it is ultimately their responsibility. Because if you put FileMaker server on a reasonable hardware and software resource, on a reasonable box or virtual server suitable for your use, suitable for the number and type of users that you're using and their means of connecting to it, it will run well, provided the solution itself is reasonably well written. It is the case, as we both know, that it is possible to write extremely inefficient stuff in FileMaker. FileMaker doesn't stop you writing something that's really, really slow. And it is also the case that the vast majority of solutions running on FileMaker Server around the world are what would choose to call legacy solutions. They're solutions that grew up over the years and have been converted as time's gone on from one format to another. And I know that, Richard, you've done a lot of training stuff on getting much more efficiency out of use of styles and themes and things like this. And if you have a system that was originally running under FileMaker up to FileMaker 11, and then you've converted it to 12, and you haven't grasped the nettle of using the new appearance layer more efficiently, using themes and styles correctly, then you may find that the sort of numbers we're talking about don't apply to you, because you're asking FileMaker Server to do so much work. It's just working double, triple, quadruple time, just trying to cope with what you're asking it to do. Whereas if you'd optimize your solution a little bit more, then you'd get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've covered in our 14 training course that we have available right now, there is a number of videos that talk about optimization for your FileMaker solution, and it can't really be overstated. Optimization is really an important skill set that you should learn as you're learning. You never quit learning about optimization. I mean, Nick has been in the business way over a decade, and he is still learning about optimization. Same for me. In May of this year, it's 25 years for me in the FileMaker business. I'm still learning about optimization. So if you haven't checked out our pro video training course, it's a whopping $40. It's a one-time fee. You pay that, and you get tons of videos, including this optimization about layouts. And if you go through the optimization, your layouts are going to run twice as fast. That's just one area. And then there's videos on unstored calculations and summaries. And then there's videos on other things that you can do to improve performance. And then this video here that we just have done is starting to understand how server is going to behave if you start to push it too far, and then kind of some of what the symptoms are. I mean, the symptoms are going to be your customers are going to call your phone and complain, but you can actually see it on the chart, on the graph to some degree, and you can start to understand that it's not going to gracefully scale up to unhappiness. It goes from happy to unhappy real fast. It goes loafing to choking, I guess was our terminology.
Loafing to choking, absolutely right. And just that first thing, that first takeaway from this video, the moment you realize, as the person responsible for making the system run well, the moment you realize that if it's not loafing, it's getting near choking, that's going to give you the starting point to really get the best out of your system, and not to have unreasonable expectations of it as well.
Yeah, and sometimes people can throw more hardware at their problem, but then a lot of times they can optimize the solution and make things run much, much faster, much more efficiently, and no hardware needed to be purchased. But I've met customers that go both ways. They'll throw money at the hardware, or they'll invest in time or effort or money into optimizing a solution. And frankly, a lot of times you're better off just optimizing the software. But if you're not running a solid state drive, for example, on your server, and enough RAM, I mean, those are the first two areas I always start with these days, anyway. So
another thing to remember in this area, of course, is that you should distinguish very carefully between what Apple call a fusion drive and a solid state drive or a hybrid drive, because a solid state drive is a bit of kit that acts like a disk drive but is just memory. A fusion drive is a combination of an Apple computer's hard drive and some of its RAM, and maybe an SSD as well, but it's basically various things put together, which is not what you want for FileMaker Server, because if one of those bits fails, the whole thing is going to go down. So just in case that ever came up, do remember a Fusion drive may be great for a workstation, but it's absolutely not what you want for a server.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Well, in the future, I think Nick and I are going to shoot some additional videos, potentially more in the advanced side of things. and we'll look forward to being able to shoot those and bring those to you. But I think for now, I think that's a wrap. So once again, thanks to everyone for watching our videos, and we'll catch you next week.
Cheers. Thanks.